Greetings ladies and gents, and welcome to this match video for Mud's mission taken from the website Royal Road. As always, I hope that you all enjoy this episode, and if you do, please consider supporting the channel. Also, all of these episodes will be available as a podcast on the various different podcast platforms. All the links will be down below. Chapter 93, Mom's Mission. After a slow rotation to align itself, the mansion scuttled sideways with metallic crab legs. The legs proved long enough to lift the bulk of the mansion above the treetops, and the buildings coasted to surprising smoothness. The 8 legs automatically swerved around the obstacles and did their best to keep the building level. The machinery seemed content to follow the eastern course with no need for further orders. Jabrax leaned forward once again to inspect the countless small runes on the console surface. If only I could figure out a way outside. I'd hate to fall into a volcano or wander into a dragon's nest. Mud headed towards the stairs, and Jabrax called out after the golem as it began climbing. "Where are you going?" "To answer the door." Mud's humans were all accounted for on the second floor of the mansion, glued to the windows. The form Mud could perceive through the domain standing outside the building in front then was an unknown. Mud did not feel any malice from the being, however. That, and the fact that they knocked and waited politely, made the construct believe that they had come to speak peaceably. Still, Mud took the reasonable precaution of warning the others in the household to be prepared in case it was hostile. Opening the door, Mud saw a human it recognized. It had never interacted with it, the old woman from the VIP section of the tournament with whom it had locked eyes with. Now, the small grey-haired woman with the black-rimmed glasses stood on the small porch of that remained attached to the mansion. Strong gusts of wind whipped at her light shawl and the few locks of old woman's hair not fastened in a tight bun. A large binder was clutched in her hands, held against her chest. "Hello there, Mud Golem, isn't it? Sorry to drop by unannounced, but there were some matters I wished to discuss with you before you moved out of town." Still, Mud felt no malice from the woman. Although Mud had developed an inherent distrust of sapiens following the string of near disasters, her offer was still enticing. One thing Mud had learned again and again in its short life is that most valuable resource of all was information. If this woman would speak of it free, then it would listen. There was one aspect of her statement, however, that bothered the construct. "You have failed your mission. I have already left Galtheus." Mud pointed at a muddy paw towards the city which slowly shrank away from the distance. "Ah, yes, that is true. I didn't expect you to leave so suddenly. It was rather a shock, I must say. May I come in? It's a bit drafty out here." Mud considered it for a moment. The current location was not secure from attack, which was a very real possibility at the moment. "You may enter. Do not damage or consume anything without permission within the mansion, or you will be eliminated." "There is no way to talk to a lady, young man," the old woman reprimanded Mud as she entered the building. After looking around for a moment, she decided on the sofa and sat down, the binder on her lap. Mud simply stood there where it was closing and locking the door. "Sit down, please. It's unnerving for you just to stand there." As per her order, Mud sat down on the spot. "No, I mean sit in the chair." "Oh, your manners are terrible. I can tell that you've had not a proper education." Mud walked to the chair and sat down as instructed. So far, the woman had done nothing but complain. Mud wanted her to speak more efficiently. Perhaps it was too much to expect humans to be able to communicate with logical manner without assistance. Mud decided to assist the human by prompting useful information. "Who are you?" That seemed like a good place to start. "Yes, well, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Adeline Bloodhammer. You may call me Mrs. Bloodhammer. I run the schools and education in Galtheus. When I found out a young man I had not been informed of was living in Galtheus, I knew I had to come and check on your education. Based on your actions up until now, I can tell that you're in dire need of guidance to become a functioning member of society." Mud refused immediately. "I have no desire to be a member of society." "Oh dear," Mrs. Bloodhammer tutted. "Less than a month old and already a rebellious phase. How precious." The old woman smiled slightly and wagged a finger towards the construct. "Now, Mud, I understand you're upset about some injustices you've experienced, and rightly so, but you're a clever lad. I'm sure you'll realize the utility that intelligent civilizations can provide to you." "That is correct. Sapiens can provide goods and services which assist me in reaching my goals. However, there is no requirement for me to participate in society to acquire these goods and services. Is your plan simply to plunder what you desire and to force those with useful skills to assist you against their wills? Mrs. Bloodhammer asked seriously, without judgment in her voice. Yes, that is the most efficient method. Gollum, it is in this case that your inexperience betrays you. The path you now tread will serve only to increase your troubles. So far, you've only been faced with incidental and opportunistic threats. What you will face if you turn to banditry is a coordinated and focused strike from organizations that are well experienced disposing of those with more power than sense. Mud understood that having more enemies was not desirable, but it hardly seemed it would be worsen the current predicament. I'm already being targeted by the Church of the Venerable Gnostics, as you yourself should be aware. That was not a result of any hostility on my part. Why should I not act with hostility if I'll be targeted by society regardless? So your reasoning is that if you are going to be treated like a criminal either way, then you might as well enjoy the profits of being a criminal. The house tilted slightly, and the building began climbing up a steadily sloping foothills of the Pankel mountain range. I don't necessarily disagree with that line of reasoning. To society, the appearance of virtue is more important than the fact of virtue. However, the slope of the house shifted and the building began to descend on the opposite side of the hill. You have thus far only attracted the ire of one major human organization. The Dalbers Association is on your side. They were even willing to protect you from the Church. Without their aid at the moment, you would have certainly been killed. This was a fact that occurred to Mud. Time and time again the Dalbers Association had benefited the Golem. However, within the greater context of sapient society, their efforts amounted to a human temporarily preventing another human from killing Mud. If a stranger wanted to kill Mud for no reason and then changed their mind, Mud would not praise the human for saving its life by changing its mind. Likewise, it made no sense to praise an aspect of society for protecting Mud from another aspect of society. Mrs. Bloodhammer's argument, however, caused Mud to re-evaluate the way it was thinking. Should two separate human organizations, particularly ones with odds at each other, be considered as mere aspects of a greater entity known as society, or should they be considered as separate entities? The most important deciding factor is safety. Mud has to prepare for the worst-case scenario. It is possible that the Dalbers Association would assist me and never betray me. However, if I trusted them and was incorrect, their betrayal would cost me greatly. If by contrast I did not trust them and was incorrect, there would be no harm done to me. The same reasoning should be true to any organization. How pessimistic of you, to plan only for the worst. You're so focused on avoiding risk that you fail to grasp opportunity. If what you want is most is safety, you will not find it hiding away in a hole. It may feel good for a moment, but eventually that will catch up to you. Do you believe that you can fend the Church off as you are now? No. The only way you will survive is by taking every chance to grow that you find, even if it comes with risk. Tell me, would you prefer a small dangers now or a certain death in the future? Mud didn't even need to think about it. The answer to that question was etched into his very soul by the master of the day of its creation. Of the two options provided, I prefer the small dangers now. Certain failure was never acceptable. Mrs. Bloodhammer nodded. I hope you realize how short-sighted it would be to throw away all the benefits that you could gain from working with the world's intelligent life. The conversation had indeed been enlightening for Mud. Mrs. Bloodhammer's perspective was completely different from what it had learned from Jabrax. At the same time, it was not altogether different. Both recommended taking advantage of humanity. Mrs. Bloodhammer's method was simply less violent. There was still an aspect that Mud wasn't certain about, though. How can I avoid more sapient organizations from targeting me, and how can I make the more organizations protect me? That is simple. Make yourself valuable. Become an asset that they can't afford to lose. Be polite and improve your manners. That's where this comes in. At that, the old woman proudly held forward a binder that she had arrived with, which bowled with many papers contained. When the Mud did not immediately respond, she shook it slightly. Go on, take it. Mud immediately retrieved the object from her thin hands. Ripping open the cover, Mud found the front page to be filled with information about etiquette in the Pascal Kingdom. Some parts, like how to eat at a formal dinner and how to bow to royalty, were disregarded by Mud as the Golem had already learned them from the etiquette skill. Other parts, however, were very interesting. They explained concepts such as how to look at a human without unnerving them, and that standing too close to a human conversely would upset them. Apparently, the information had been written for use by non-humans attempting to integrate into their society, as the knowledge was considered so obvious to humans that they did not normally bother to even mention it. Flipping through the pages, Mud found similar information for socializing in various demi-human cultures, past the cultural information, pages listing information about countries and major organizations across the world. Mud hungrily absorbed the information as it flipped through the pages. This information, if it was true, was incredibly valuable. At that thought, Mud froze in rapt flipping and sent a concerned procureur to Mrs. Bloodhammer. "What do you desire in exchange for this information?" The old woman smiled in delight. "Oh, that's free of charge. If you want to pay me back, then try your best to learn all of it and complete the worksheets in the back." "I do not believe you." Mud held aloft the binder of homework. "No one would give away something so incredibly valuable for free. Why would you do something that provides you no benefit?" Mrs. Bloodhammer couldn't help but laugh. "Oh, I wish every student understood the value of education as much as you do, Mud. As for what I gain, I'm a teacher. Educating is my passion. If I can help a young one lead a better life, I am content. I understand. Educating young life forms is your prime directive." "Exactly. Well, we're getting a bit far from home now. I should probably head back." Mrs. Bloodhammer stood from the sofa, shifting her weight smoothly as the house leveled off, having entered a valley. "It's a shame that you didn't stay in town longer so I could teach you properly. If you ever pass near Galthares again, please come and visit me." "I accept your order." Mud proceeded to the door and unlocked it. Following the Pancol etiquette it had learned from the worksheet, the golem stepped to the side and helped open the door for Mrs. Bloodhammer. "Goodbye. It was nice to meet you." "Such a quick learner." The old woman patted Mud on the head gently. Reaching into a pocket with a long dress, she pulled out a small orb wrapped in paper and handed it to Mud. The golem accepted it graciously. "Best match, hard candy." Stepping to the doorway, the old woman turned back and waved a farewell to the construct. "Goodbye, and remember, no banditry." "Yes, ma'am." After turning around, Mrs. Bloodhammer took a few steps to the edge of the porch. Below them, the treetops whizzed by as the mansion continued its trek east. With a small hop, the woman leapt from the edge, vanishing from sight. End of chapter. Chapter 94. Manhunt. What exactly is MP? Yes, I'm referring to those little letters in the Akashic record. It is common knowledge that MP is a measure of individuals' capacity to store the imitations of their soul, often referred to as mana, and then therefore evoke magic. More MP means more magic. Simple, right? Well, not quite. We've explained what MP represents, but not the unit of measurement itself. For any two individuals, one MP means exactly the same thing. There may be slight differences in individuals' actual MP compared with other displays of the record, primarily as a result of rounding, but we'll put such fiddly details aside for the moment. In the most scenarios, one MP from the novice will be exactly equal to one MP from a great master of ideals. All mana is equal, having the same energy potential per unit. The use of MP as a means of measurement predates the Akashic record. In ancient times, mana tools were tested using specially designed artifacts or by manual testing, having the user expend their entire mana pool performing a very specific task. The mana expended would then be calculated based on the results. These methods are all still used today, but those who eschew the Akashic record, although they are less reliable and accurate than simply using the record. The traditional definition of MP is the amount of mana required to produce sufficient force to lift 1 cubic unit of pure gold 1 unit into the air, gold being used because it is naturally low magic resistance. This was at a time when both use of mana and testing methods were less efficient than they are today, however. The value of 1 MP has been refined over the time as to line up with the previous forward measurement. As a result, 1 modern MP represents the force to lift 1.65 cubic units of gold 1 unit into the air. That may seem like a surprisingly large amount of strength for a single MP. A cubic unit is large, and gold is heavy. It is true that there is more energy packed into each MP than most magic users realize. Part of the reason for this is few spells are suited directly to lift a hunk of gold. If someone has mastered the ideal of illusions, for example, they may have a hard time lifting an object no matter how much mana they use. Even an ideal suited to lifting, like the ideal of strength, might be used to less than a perfect efficiency depending on the caster. As such, it is advised that you never assume that you will get a full force of an MP in any practical scenario. Excerpt from Understanding the Akashic Records, Units of Measurement. Leader Ghoul considered the events of the day as he calmly destroyed the charging corpse worm with a punch to the center mass. Today had been a bad day, even worse than he had expected. 2 of his longtime friends were dead, as well as many fine young men and women who had known personally. It was a tragedy, and despite being misled multiple times, he finally knew was to blame. The demons. Ghoul cut through the horde of giant caterpillars crawling through the street as the stroke of his halberd. At first he had attributed the danger he had sensed to the king's meddling. Then he blamed Sithla, and then when the Fagia Republic attacked, he thought he had figured it all out. But once again he was proven wrong. Leading the Republic in his unjustified sneak attack was an enemy of all life. When both the Republic champion Nemo and the ever-loyal Ant-Man had confirmed that General Farwind was a demon, the Republic leadership quickly agreed to a peaceful withdrawal. They didn't even offer to assist cleaning up the dungeon monsters when they withdrew. But perhaps that was for the best. No one wanted to try and explain to Galthea's soldiers what they would need to work side by side by the army that was just murdering their friends. If only Ghoul had realized the truth about Farwind when they first met. The cause of all of this was how annoyingly difficult it was to detect or track demons. There was no known method for detecting them without either killing them or a suitable unique skill. If Farwind had been expecting to be cut in 2, he could have been prepared to fake internal organs. Since killing everyone suspicious to check if they are demons was not a sustainable policy, the only viable way to detect them was the use of a certain sensory unique skills, and those who had such skills were often found dead. Unfortunately, Ghoul's nose did not have that capability. Following a sudden impulse, Leader Ghoul opened his skill menu. He hadn't actually checked the thing in years, since he hadn't mastered any new skills lately. What he saw nearly made him drop his weapon. Guild name Enhanced Bloodhound Unique. Requirement: Smell the banishment of a demon. After recovering from his shock, Thagi smacked the corpse worm with a chewing on his face and accepted the upgrade. The familiar feeling of soul-shifting followed. As the last piece clicked into place, Ghoul immediately noticed a new scent. Bloodhound Unique Skill has mutated into Demon Hound Unique Skill. The smell emanating from his armor and weapon from the previous clash, and the lingering around the places that the demon Farwind had visited while inside of the city. Ghoul could already smell Farwind before this upgrade. The stench that Ghoul instinctively recognized as demonic was new. There was another smell, however, that was much more concerning than the lingering stench of a dead man. A second demon, one which had been inside the city recently. It even smelled somewhat familiar. Leader Ghoul's nose twitched like a rabbit, trying to identify the source. Unfortunately, the stench of the demon was so overwhelming that he could not identify the source from his memory. That did not mean it would escape, however. He had the scent now, and he would hunt that demon down. Technically speaking, the association had a peaceful relationship with demons at the moment, so he might need to temporarily retire to exact his revenge. He knew plenty of people who would be happy to join him on the demon hunt, even without the aid of the Dalbers. Later that evening, after sunset, Ghoul finally returned to the Dalbers Association. The flow of beasts from the dungeon had finally slowed to a stop. All of the escaped monsters above Tier 2 were dead. It was the best to allow the rest to be cleaned up by the Dalbers and guards, to grow stronger and to regain their pride. As Ghoul trudged through the association lobby, he was approached by Shin. When Shin arrived next to Ghoul, the samurai pulled a small object out of his pouch on his side and pushed it into the association leader's hand. Thagi looked down at the small artifact that now pulsed with barely contained power from a multitude of soul fragments strapped within. The achievement recording tool. Thagi tightened his giant fist around the artifact. Everything had gone so wrong. I suppose you're the only one that'll be turning this in. Not that it matters. No one else could collect nearly this much. Ghoul looked down at the light and now spilled from between his fingers. Shin shook his head. That is a lie. How many died from Executioner's spell? He had a point. That small little golem's magic was weak, but in terms of coverage it was unsurpassed. Although Mud did not assist in the cleanup as Shin had, his contribution was likely even larger. He just killed caterpillars, you killed a demon. Clearly you contributed more. This once again shook his head. The rule you set was 1 kill was 1 point. I will not stain my honor by accepting a false win. I do not care if the executioner cannot turn his stone in. We both know that to be the truth. Ghoul handed the glowing stone to a passing association employee, wanting to be rid of the reminder of the horrific week. He turned back towards Shin. You're the only one left from the tournament that didn't flee the town. Congratulations, you win by default. The contribution from that should be enough to put you past that construct. That is not satisfactory. I never finished my fight with Mud. Ghoul raised an eyebrow, but Shin held up a hand to stop him to reply. I know I clearly defeated him, but the tournament was delayed. I will not accept a fake victory. Well, too bad, and I'm in charge and I declare you the winner. Ghoul yelled towards the employee now carrying the recording artifact. Go get the prize from the tournament and give it to Shin and record him as the winner. I will accept the prize, but not from myself. Shin squinted through the visor. I will find the executioner, and I'll complete our duel. Whichever of us wins will keep the reward. Fine, do whatever you want. It's yours. Now get your ego weapon from him when you do find him. Thagi waved a dismissive hand to Shin and walked away. After a few steps, he stopped and called back to his shoulder. Shin, I'm preparing for a big mission soon, not an association. I could use your help. Not until my work is over. I thought you would say that. Thagi walked away from the well-deserved rest. Sitting on the sofa after Mrs. Bloodhammer left, Mud began flipping through the binder. Valuable information about all aspects of the world was neatly organized and presented in an easy-to-understand format. Compared to the Master's Library, which often assumed a large amount of prior knowledge, these worksheets worked up from the most basic concepts. Some time later, Novus came down the stairs. Novus leaned over Mud and let out a confused murmur. What are you staring at a test sheet? Novus, do you understand this paper? I do not understand the formatting, and it appears to include erroneous information. Novus rested an elbow on the back of the sofa and put a chin on her hands. That isn't information, that's a test. You're supposed to circle the correct answers. Mud placed a finger on the paper and traced a circle, elicting a giggle from Novus. No, silly, with a pen. That way the teacher can tell you if you're right later. It's for testing your knowledge. That will not be necessary. I already know that I know the correct answer. Further verification is not necessary. With that announcement, Mud flipped to the next page. Couldn't somebody who is wrong also be sure that they have the correct answer? Mud hesitated for a moment, but continued through the pages. That does not apply to me. I'm certain I memorized the information correctly. A few seconds later, Mud flipped back to the test page and stood up to find a pen. I will take the test, but only in order to prove my mastery of the subject and inspire further loyalty from my humans. Uh-huh. Sure, that's why. Novus nodded and smiled smugly. When he completed the test, Mud had one answer wrong. Mud had misinterpreted a homonym. As Mud prepared to fill out another test sheet, the golem was distracted by Jibrax poking its head with her finger. As Mud did not understand the purpose of this gesture, he continued answering the multiple-choice questions. Mud, stop ignoring me. I need to know where the steer of this house. Mud replied while continuing its work. I wish to avoid civilization for the time being. Completing his worksheet and being very pleased with the perfect grade the Mud gave itself, Mud quickly flipped back to the earlier part of the binder, showing a simplified map of the civilized continent. Our approximate location is here. Mud narrowed one of his fingers to a point and placed it within the Pankal mountain range, east of Galtheus. I believe this is still too close to the human civilization. I would like to travel to the opposite side of the mountain before stopping to create shelter. Mud slid his finger over to the right, tracing a path around the large mountain. Does this mansion have enough fuel to complete the journey? Sitting comfortably in the air beside Mud, Jibrax nodded. Yeah, we're fine for a long time. At our current speeds, it'll take at least a day to reach that location. What is your opinion of this location for a temporary base of operations? Is it suitably far from sapient areas of activity for our safety? That place, Well, there won't be any sapiens there. I'm sure of that. Jibrax grinned slightly. Excellent. It's decided then. Adjust course northeast. Jibrax gave an exaggerated salute and "Yes, Captain," before floating back down the stairs. A small, scruffy lizard-like bipedal in a green camouflage cloak quickly sprinted up the stone-cold corridor, lit only by a cool orange glow of the illusory fire set into the walls. Arriving at the large metal door, flanked by guards, the small creature doubled over to take a quick breath, and hands and knees. One of the much more heavily armored but equally short lizards guarded the door, flicked its tail in annoyance. "What business do you have with the Queen?" The kobold scout took a few moments to take deep breaths, and then stood up and replied, "I have a report for her." Digging through the layers of solid clothes beneath his cloak, the scout finally pulled out a dirt-caked metal badge. After a few quick rubs against the cloak to get most of the muck off, he presented it to the guard, who let out a sigh and opened the door. Once the door had opened a crack, the kobold scout slipped through like a breeze, rapidly heading for the center of the enormous stone cavern. All through the room stood sculptures, paintings, books, pottery, and many other pieces of art, all of the highest quality. In the center lay the Queen herself, a towering brown dragon, lying curled up in a ball and resting peaceably. Her size was incredible, at over 12 units nose to tail. As an earth dragon, she had a rather stocky build and angular facial features. Two impressive off-white horns grew from the sides of her head, bending sharply at two spots along the length of her form, an upward curve. As the scout silently neared, the dragon spoke in a voice like a tumbling gravel, not opening her eyes. "What gift do you bring me, child?" "Information, my queen." Once again digging through the soiled clothing, the kobold this time pulled out a scroll and began to read the contents. "Sightings of a large beast or machine of unknown origin traveling along the southwest edge of the Queen's territory, traveling east, approximately." The kobold stopped for a moment to check some small details on its wrist before proceeding. 1 hour ago it shifted northeast, directly towards this mountain. Description of invader, very large, estimated over twice as large as the Queen. Movement of the shape resembles, a house with crab legs. The kobold stopped reading for a moment to rub his eyes, then double-checked the writing. "Weird. The crab legs are made of steel. That's all the information we have at the moment." The message completed, the kobold returned the scroll to his pocket. "I see. How odd." The earth dragon lifted her head and looked up the kobold with piercing gold eyes. "Let's sure to give them a proper welcome, shall we?" End of chapter. Chapter 95. Mediation Misapprehension. Within the walking mansion, the metal crab legs, a pile of enchanted mud planned his world domination. For indeed, nothing short of complete subjugation of all life on the planet would allow true safety into perpetuity. Experience had shown that risk on Mud's directives could come at any time. The only reason that remained was how exactly the golem was known as Mud would accomplish his goal of complete global homogeny. Perhaps the most obvious first step would be further increase his personal power. Already, Mud had entered Tier 3 within the first month of his life. From what it understood, that was an unusually fast speed. This instrumental goal of increasing personal power would be achieved in many ways, from training skills to meditating on ideals, but the quickest, most reliable would be to be gaining experience. If Mud could enhance its level to at least 7th tier, there would remain little in this world that could pose the threat to the golem. The second step of world domination was collecting powerful, clever, and loyal minions. In that regard, Mud's current batch was flawed. Jabrax and Cobb lacked loyalty, Cobb and Nervous lacked power, and Nervous was not particularly clever. Ego was the closest to a perfect ally, but like Mud, she required more levels. There was also the fact that she was one of the master's possessions, which limited her utility. She could not be used for suicide attacks or missions with risk or capture, for example. Mud had concluded that more higher-quality minions needed to be collected. Perhaps a new organization could be formed, modeled after the employed by the Sapiens. The creation of such an organization to manage Mud's empire and assist in large-scale endeavors as the third step in world domination. From there, it was merely a matter of crushing dissenters while slowly spreading its influence. As far as Mud knew, constructs are immortal. Mud had all the time in the world to become more powerful. In fact, should one live long enough, it seemed inevitable that they would amass a large amount of power and ability. But if it were the case, why is Jabrax so weak? Sure, by civilian standards she is a powerhouse. Considering her age, however, she seemed to be almost absurdly weak. Was Mud's reasoning incorrect? Had the golem missed some critical factor that would limit its growth? With growing concern for the plot of global conquest, Mud trudged down to the basement to consult with his demon. Jibrax, as it happened, was busy making some modifications to bark in the surgery table while Mud walked in. Jibrax, why are you weak? The demon jerked up from slicing and looked confused on her face. Excuse me? You've informed me that you are in excess of 2,000 years old and cannot die. Why are you not tier 10 yet? Ah, that. Jibrax continued to work on the conscious but dreaming bark. Well, this isn't exactly a secret information, since the sapiens figured it out a while ago, but don't spit at what I'm about to tell you around. Mud silently waited for her to continue, head swaying as usual. The simple fact of the matter is, demons don't really level like you do. We don't have the tiers or any of that. We simply are what we are, from birth. We're ready to reflect our true selves. Can you still become stronger by mastering large number of deals and amassing rare skills? Retorted Mud. The problem with that is, Jibrax's explanation was cut short as the Dimension suddenly lurched forward, the building tilting sharply. Mud stumbled and slid down the now steep floor, and bark fell from the table and proceeded to roll to the wall. What happened? Asked Jibrax in surprise. All 4 legs have fallen into sinkholes. The holes then sealed themselves, trapping the legs. Moments later, the house leveled out as the opposite side of the mansion fell heavily, the mass of the mansion striking the ground with a bang. The remaining 4 legs had been similarly trapped. After a moment of delay, Mud continued. There was a single individual approaching the front door. Jibrax walked towards the sub-basement. The cannon? No. Mud focused on the figure approaching the door. I suspected this individual is not one responsible for our capture, but instead a messenger on their behalf. I do not wish to escalate the conflict, as they might damage the master's mansion. I'll attempt communication. Perhaps that would be better if I did the talking. That will not be necessary. Mud boldly walked up the stairs of the basement. I read a worksheet about negotiation. When Mud answered the door, he found standing before him a scruffy bipedal lizard wearing a camouflage cloak and a pair of goggles. For the first time in the golem's life, it would talk to someone without having to look up at them. Greetings, dirty man. Are you the owner of this crab? Mud remembered that it had learned from the worksheet the first step in any trade was introductions. I am Mud Golem. Give me your name. The kobold tried to lean around Mud to see into the house. I am Kit. Are you the master of this place? Names have been exchanged successfully. It seems kobold wished to exchange additional personal information. I'm the leader of this place. Who is your master? The kobold momentarily halted his attempts to peek around Mud and stand proudly. I have the honor of representing Her Majesty the Queen of this mountain, the great Earth Dragon, Utomokus. This was all going exactly according to plan. Next is to make an opening offer. Mud simply wanted to continue on its journey unopposed, but the worksheet had advised asking her more than you actually wanted, so you can give concessions later. I demand that your queen give me all her territory and possessions immediately. And at that, the kobold scout choked and stumbled backwards, hands raised in shock. What? You dare challenge the dragon for her land? Do you accept? The kobold stomped his feet and shook his fist above his head angrily. Never! We will never accept such disrespect. As expected, excessive offer was refused. Now Mud would lower the initial offer slightly and show willingness to negotiate. Instead of all the territory, I'll accept the queen as a slave. That would be an acceptable alternative. Dragons are known to be powerful, so she would likely be a useful minion. You! The kobold was at a loss for words. Mud was worried the kobold was about making a counter-offers. Mud decided to assist a clearly inexperienced and ignorant kobold by offering something of value in its own side. In exchange for your queen, I will not destroy your country. Mud wasn't planning on attacking or engaging in any hostilities anyway, but as an assurance to not do so in the future, it could be seen as valuable. Surely, an existing country or large organization had come to the same realization as Mud had, that all uncontrolled groups should be assumed to be hostile. A promise of non-hostility should therefore be valuable. Enforcing the promise would be even possible with a contract. The kobold stood silently, mouth agape. Perhaps the deal was not just sweet enough. I will also give you... Mud dug through its torso with something it could trade. Eventually, Mud pulled out a small object and placed it in the kobold's hand. This hard candy. Do you accept? The kobold looked down at the candy in its hand, then back at Mud. He repeated the action 3 more times. The scout slowly backed away from the golem and off the porch. Once a fair distance away, the kobold turned around and sprinted into the woods. Mud closed the door. It seemed negotiations had gone perfectly. Mud's true goal in the negotiations was to make the kobold leave without hostilities, and now the kobold had left. Although there were some hiccups, everything had turned out as it desired. Strangely, despite about how perfectly Mud had performed, the golem had gained no relevant skill from the Akashic. Mud was fully expecting to gain a negotiation or haggling skill, or perhaps several ranks in skill at once. As Mud planned how to extract the house-wrapped metal legs from the sinkholes, the golem was shocked to see a large number of lifeforms entering its domain from all sides. Many shared the short stature of the kobolds, but others were much larger. Once again, knocking came from the front door of the mansion. Perhaps the negotiations had not gone as well as Mud had first believed. That the excessive demands caused the kobold to believe that Mud was unreasonable and not worthy of negotiating with. Answering the door was not an option, as the forces outside implied a threat of violence. Mud turned towards the stairs and informed Jabrax that it was time to use the cannon. Unfortunately, Mud was not yet skilled enough to penetrate multiple floors with its mana. Mud hesitated halfway when one of the large shapes neared the front door and slammed into it. No damage was done, thankfully, and Mud continued to walk, but hesitated again as a pale blue aura covered the door. Some kind of magic. Runes appeared on the door and the magic faded. Mud continued. Once more the blue magic appeared, but this time much more intense and vibrant. The red runes flashed to life, but were quickly overcome by much denser magic. As the runes finally failed, a soft clack came from the door, and it slowly swung open. There, standing outside, was a winged green dragon. I would like to reopen negotiations. I will leave my mansion in exchange. Mud's attempt at diplomacy was cut short as the dragon slipped through the much too small door into an impressive display of flexibility, then pounced towards Mud with claws outstretched. So large was the dragon that its back brushed against the roof of the entrance room, even as it stood quadrupedally. Mud managed to slip out of the dragon's grasp as an amorphous form, but the magical beast's strength and speed meant that it would grasp soon again as it freed itself. As the dragon became increasingly annoyed, it unleashed a bellowing growl towards the entrance. A short time later, a kobold soldier ran in carrying a sealed urn. In the meantime, Mud tried to fight back, but in vain. The blades failed to penetrate the dragon's sturdy scales, and its magic faded upon contacting the dragon with no apparent effect. Even striking its own metal frame with a force bolt failed to move Mud fast enough to escape from the wrestling dragon. In a moment of desperation, Mud attempted to divide itself in two, but the dragon merely slammed the golem's body back into a mass. When the kobold soldier arrived, it held a large urn aloft. After removing the top, the dragon quickly regained a grip on Mud and shoved the construct into the dark, confined interior. Before Mud could escape, the top was quickly sealed. No matter how much Mud thrashed and pushed, the urn did not yield, and magic was as useless on the urn as it was against the dragon. Although Mud could still see its domain from inside the urn, the golem had yet mastered the ability to the point of actually being able to do anything useful. Mud could only watch helplessly as Cobb and Novus were captured by the dragon and several kobolds, and the two were tied up and carried out of the mansion, along with the urn containing Mud. Although they explored the basement, the invaders did not discover the sub-basement, in which now hid Jabrax, Jericho, and Bark. But the worst was yet to come. Once the building was considered clear by enemies, kobold soldiers marched in and began carrying handfuls of objects out of the mansion. "This is unacceptable," Mud vibrated with rage. Unfortunately, there was nothing the golem could do. When the group was led out of the main domain, the golem was no longer certain what was happening. It felt a rhythmic falling of the kobolds walking on fours, carrying the urn that Mud was trapped in. Most of the travel tended towards uphill marching, but near the end of the journey they began to descend instead. Mud was set on the floor. A short time after being set down, the top of the urn was removed. Not wanting to miss a chance to escape, Mud quickly leapt out, barely avoiding a striking Cobb in the face. Nearby, Novus clutched her knees and her chest while rocking slowly. The group was in the center of a glowing ring of ruins, instead of located in the center of a stone room. Mud recognized the ruins immediately. It was a containment circle, similar to the one that trapped Jabrax when they first met. Escape from inside would be nearly impossible. Standing aside the walls of the room looked two kobold soldiers, watching the group with curiosity. Perhaps I should have let Jabrax negotiate, thought Mud. End of chapter. Chapter 96. Matriarch. Mud walked to the edge of the ruins, causing the kobold guards to stand up on their position, sitting against the wall and clutch their weapons. They quickly returned to their relaxed posture as Mud bounced off the invisible barrier into a muddy rump. After climbing back to his feet, Mud walked around the interior of the runic circle, examining the runework as well as testing the barrier with one arm. After completing a full lap, the golem was forced to conclude that there was no means of escaping available. Mud had not yet tested the strength of the floor or the chamber roof. The runes indicated that the encased area should be cylindrical in shape, bearing some flaw in the design that both its creator and Mud overlooked. There was no way out. A suitable specialized skill or a magic might be able to overwhelm the runes, however. With that in mind, Mud sent a subtle auditory hallucination to both Novus and Cobb, who both sat at the center of the circle, hoping that it would not be detected by the captors. Novus, Cobb, do not verbally reply to my question. If you have any skills which allow us to escape this prison, vibrate your hand at 20 vibrations per second. If not, vibrate your hand at 30 vibrations per second. Novus scratched her head and looked back and forth between Mud and Cobb, and merely giggled. Mud, that's not Novus. I specifically requested you not to communicate verbally. The girl looked down at her hands and appeared to momentarily concentrate while shaking her hands, only to give up and flop on her back. Mud was unsure why the humans were not properly following the orders. Based on the book of human biology, Mud was certain that humans were physically capable of such a task. It's possible that the human mastery over their own body was truly that limited. For the moment, Mud decided to take the lack of reply to mean that they could not effect an escape. Seeing no means of escape, Mud attempted to communicate with the guards. His efforts were thwarted by the barrier blocking his manner. Instead, the golem sent a message to Cobb. Cobb, establish a communication with the kobolds. Cobb shrugged, but stood up. When he walked over to the edge of the barrier, the guards once again stood at alert. When he reached the wall, Cobb leaned forward, one arm against the invisible barrier. Hey there. The kobolds didn't reply. Hey, what are you on the left? What's your name? The heavily scarred human pointed towards the slightly shorter kobold. Don't bother, prisoner. You can't talk your way out of this one. The Queen will decide your fate. A smug grin was visible on the reptilian snout that poked out from below the taller guard's metal helmet. Oh, I'm not trying to get out or anything. I'm just, Cobb rubbed his free hand against the back of his neck and turned shyly. I've never met such a beautiful woman before. I was wondering if I could get your name. The taller guard snickled. Did they set up the barrier wrong so that it holds in carbon dioxide? I think our prisoner is suffering from blurred vision and confusion. The shorter guard punched him in the arm, causing a dull clang as the armor struck. Screw you! I'm totally beautiful. His vision is perfect. She returned to her guarding stance a moment before turning back to the other guard and yelled at him again. And what even is carbon biocide? The second guard crossed his arms and raised a snout into second display of smugness in the course of a minute. It's pronounced carbon dioxide. Is that what makes you die if you light a fire in the tunnels? One of the dragons told me. Was it common, Dax? He probably just made it up. Always making stuff up. First guard replied dismissively. The second guard stomped his foot repeatedly and began loudly defending his good friend Dax. As the two guards started working up the argument, Cobb interrupted them. Excuse me. Both guards stopped their shouting and turned their snouts back towards Cobb. Your name? My name, given to me by the Queen, is Div. It means like a goddess in the ancient tongue. She replied haughtily. Dax told me Div means splitting something, if in your case, because you look like a butt. The second guard comment was cut off as he was punched in the stomach, sending him crashing surprisingly far into another wall. Cobb dramatically leaned back on the barrier, his wrist against his head. Like a goddess! What a fitting title for someone as wonderful as you! My name is Cobb. Div walked closer to the barrier and began conversing casually with Cobb. After nearly half an hour of pointless banality and the occasional compliment being exchanged, Mud decided that the conversation was not worth listening to, and decided to spend his focus on something more useful. Returning to the center of the magic circle, Mud collapsed on the floor and focused the majority of his mental energy to contemplating the ideal of home. A home was a place to repair, to keep out what was unwanted, a place of protection. Right now, Mud really wanted to return to his home. Would an ideal of home be easier to return to? Perhaps its location mattered, but Mud's home could already move around. A spell that could teleport Mud back to the mansion could be really useful. Or maybe a spell that could summon the mansion to Mud, although doing that underground would probably have catastrophic consequences. Mud felt like he was on the cusp of a breakthrough when the dragon trudged into the prison. When he entered, Div leapt up from where she sat next to the barrier and sprinted back to her post for the far wall. The green dragon snorted derisively at her display and lifted her kobold guard from the ground, where he laid sprawled since being struck. After a few shakes, the kobold awoke, much kicking and swearing. Once he noticed he was being held aloft by a dragon, he instead decided to hang limply. When he was set back on the ground, the kobold quickly scurried back to his own spot against the wall, standing at attention. After finishing with the guards, the dragon approached the barrier. He quickly scanned the 3 prisoners, his eyes finally coming to a rest on Mud. A low, rumbling voice like trees falling came from an enormous mouth lined with dagger teeth. "You will have an audience with the Queen. Come with me. Do not foolishly attempt to escape." The dragon then dropped one long black claw against the edge of the runic circle, ripping the visible gash in the air. Not wanting to upset the powerful magical beast, Mud quickly crawled through the opening. As Cobb attempted to follow, the green dragon brushed him to the side and resealed the prison. "You are not needed. You may continue to socialize with Div." At that comment, the kobold guard smiled uncertainly at the dragon, seemingly torn between the horror that her superior called her out for slacking, or relief that he didn't seem upset. When the green dragon turned and began to leave, Mud did as he was told and followed. As the dragon had said, trying to flee would be foolish. The first battle had proven that Mud as an opponent was well beyond the golem's ability to defeat. This made Mud curious exactly how powerful this dragon was. Of course, it didn't hurt to be polite before fishing for information. "Green Dragon, I demand to know your name. My name is Mud Golem." "Europe's bossy, as I was told." Well, you introduced yourself, so I'm honor bound to return the gesture. Mutilignum. The arced granite tunnels of the dragon led Mud through were clearly designed with a being of Utiligram's size in mind, granting plenty of clearance even should the dragon choose to walk on his hind legs, although there wasn't quite enough room for him to spread his wings. The slightly uneven surface of the walls and occasional tool marks implied that the tunnels had been carved manually rather than crafted with earth magic. "What is your race and class level?" Utilignum shook his head. "I will not say, but I will tell you that I'm tier 6. I'm still a young dragon, and have not yet reached my potential." One of the dragon's cat-like eyes turned towards Mud. Taking it as a request for a compensation, Mud decided to reply in kind. "I'm a tier 3. After that reply, the dragon's gaze returned to the front, and the two continued in silence for a short time. "What is the tier of Queen Lutimachus?" Utilignan laughed and the forest falling. "Perhaps you should ask her yourself. Although you probably won't get a straight answer, she's prone to flights of fancy. That personality of hers is probably why she keeps the kobolds. Should I be concerned for my safety?" The green dragon stopped in front of the pair of large metal doors. "Well, looks like we're here. Head on in. You can't miss her. She's the one that looks like a dragon." Utilignum placed a claw hand on Mud's back and pushed the golem through the door before it could object, and then slammed the door shut. Mud found itself in a spacious cave. Every direction Mud looked, the golem saw finely crafted but apparently useless artificial objects. The purpose of collecting such objects was unclear to Mud. While the painting on the nearby wall depicted a silhouette of a man walking down a flight of stairs, he would have certainly required a great skill to care to reduce. It served no apparent function. The painting was too dark to make any details out of location, making it useless as a map. The shadows covered most of the man's body, making it useless for the method of identification. Despite Mud's careful examination, there didn't seem to be any runes hidden in the artwork. It was simply a drawing of a man on stairs. Useless. Other objects presented similar mysteries. Why would anyone use such effort and skill to modify a rock into the shape of a human throwing a disc? For what purpose was a fountain crafted of the shape of a cherub? Why weren't any of these finely painted vases or pots being used to store things? The only conclusion that Mud could make was that the owner of this collection had an unusual prime directive that was completely alien to Mud's understanding of the world. Perhaps a directive like collect objects whose production required resources disproportionate to their functionality. Such a directive would certainly explain the hundreds of small jade carvings of birds resting on the glass shelf. As Mud slowly explored the collection of fine art, Gollum finally happened upon a large lump of brown scales, slowly expanding and contracting. Mud sent a greeting. "I am Mud Gollum. Are you Queen Lutomachus?" And the lump began to slowly shift. Lutomachus lifted her head from below her tail and turned her angular head towards Mud. Her pupils retracted into thin slits as she examined the new arrival. Her voice was like a tumbling gravel. "Fine craftsmanship, but the artist skimped a bit on the details, didn't he? Or did he get bored halfway through? Just looking at it is annoying, like seeing a single misaligned tile in the middle of a room. Hold still for a moment." Lutomachus lifted her large ground claw, and the claw resembled a split flint, extending straight from her forefinger before turning sharply downwards near the end, forming a sharp hook. Even as the jagged talon approached, Mud dared not move. When the claw finally entered Mud's chest, a strange sensation flooded the golem's body, a feeling of control it had never felt before. Looking down its own muddy arms, Mud lifted it up without using amorphous form. Articulation runes added. There, much better. Lutomachus removed the claw from Mud's body and pointed it towards the circular stone platform near where she rested. "Now stand on that platform over there, Triglops, and let's have a chat." End of chapter. And that, my friends, concludes this video. I hope that you enjoyed. If you did, please consider supporting the author from the link down below. Otherwise, if you wish to support this channel, there are numerous ways to do so, like liking, subscribing, and possibly even becoming a patron. Otherwise, the easiest way would be to share. And until the next video, I hope that you all have a good one, and I'll see you then. Cheers.